His name shone in lights, and his bank account boasted millions. But behind the designer suits and glamorous parties, he was drowning. I was just the cleaning lady, but I became the only person who truly saw him, and that changed both our lives forever. Before you judge someone by their wealth or status, listen to the story that will make you question everything you think you know about success and human connection. I wasn't supposed to be anything special in his world, just another invisible person who moved through the shadows of his mansion, making beds and dusting shelves. My name is Maya Johnson, and for 15 years I've cleaned homes for some of the wealthiest people in this city. I grew up in Southside Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs and still found time to teach me that a person's character isn't measured by their bank account. I carried those lessons with me through community college, through my first marriage that ended too soon, through raising my son alone, and through building a cleaning business that kept us afloat. The first time I walked through those imposing mahogany doors, I felt what everyone feels: intimidation. The marble foyer alone was bigger than my entire apartment, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years, art on the walls that I recognized from museum catalogues. And somewhere in that 15,000 square foot monument to success lived a man whose face I'd seen on magazine covers, whose name was whispered in conversations about power and influence. Everyone knew Jackson Pierce, self-made tech millionaire, philanthropist when the cameras were rolling, sought-after bachelor despite being in his 40s, the kind of man who could walk into any room and command it without saying a word. I'd seen him on TV, giving interviews with that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. I'd heard the stories about his brutal business tactics, his legendary parties, his revolving door of model girlfriends. The world saw a success story, the American dream personified. But I saw something else that first week. I saw how the sheets on only one side of his massive bed were rumpled, while the other side remained perfectly untouched. I noticed the untouched food trays, the barely sipped expensive whiskey. I found the prescription bottles hidden behind bathroom products, names of medications I recognized from my cousin's battle with depression. And most telling, the absence of personal photos anywhere in that massive house. No family, no real friends, just framed magazine covers and awards. What struck me most was the contrast between the public man and the private space. When he hosted parties, the house transformed into a showcase: music, laughter, beautiful people draped over expensive furniture. But in the quiet mornings after, I'd find lone coffee cups on balconies overlooking the ocean, abandoned like the man himself once the performance ended. There was something in those empty spaces that reminded me of the hollow look I sometimes caught in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. I didn't know then that I was witnessing a man drowning in plain sight. I didn't know that behind the wealth and the power was someone more lost than anyone I'd ever met. And I certainly didn't know that somehow, for reasons neither of us understood at first, I would become the only person who truly saw him. Not the millionaire, but the man hiding inside. I grew up watching my mother stretch $20 across a week of groceries. I learned early that hard work doesn't guarantee success, just survival. By 16, I was juggling school and a job at the local diner. By 23, I was a single mother with a 3-year-old son and dreams that seemed to shrink with every bill that arrived. But I had something money couldn't buy: a community that lifted me when I stumbled, neighbors who watched my son when I picked up extra shifts, and my mother's voice in my head saying, "Maya, your worth isn't in your wallet." Jackson Pierce's story couldn't have been more different, at least the version the world knew. The tech wunderkind who dropped out of Stanford to launch his first startup. The visionary who turned a garage operation into a billion-dollar empire before he turned 30. His face appeared on the covers of business magazines with headlines like "The Man with the Golden Touch" and "Pierce's Perfect Formula." He donated millions to charities when cameras flashed. His dating life fueled gossip columns. The world saw a man who had everything. Our interactions were brief at first. A polite nod as he rushed past me to his home office. Instructions about dinner parties left with his house manager. I was part of the background machinery that kept his life running smoothly, invisible but essential, like the air conditioning or the security system. Just another service provider in a life built on being served. But there were moments when the mask slipped. The morning I found him staring out over the ocean, still in yesterday's clothes, an untouched glass of scotch in his hand. The night I worked late and heard him arguing on the phone, his voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't place, something between rage and desperation. The time I entered his study, to find him sitting in darkness, surrounded by screens displaying stock prices, but looking at none of them. These glimpses confused me. They didn't match the confident titan who commanded rooms and markets with equal ease. They were cracks in a facade I hadn't even realized was there. Until the night everything changed. It happened on a stormy Tuesday night. I was finishing late because my replacement called in sick, and the rain was coming down in sheets that turned the mansion's panoramic windows into waterfalls. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago. I was wiping down the kitchen counters when I heard the crash from his study. I found him sitting on the floor amid shattered glass, a broken picture frame in his hands. His knuckles were bleeding where he'd punched the wall. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd started working there, he actually saw me. Not the cleaning lady, me, Maya. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expensive shirt rumpled and stained with what smelled like whiskey. "My father died today," he said, his voice hoarse. 10 years ago today. I should have just nodded sympathetically and backed away. That's what the job called for. But something in his expression reminded me of my son after his first heartbreak, that raw, unguarded pain that strips away all pretense. "I lost my mother last spring," I said, kneeling to help pick up the glass. "Some days it still feels like yesterday." He looked startled, as if he'd forgotten he'd spoken aloud. Then he handed me the photo from the broken frame, a much younger Jackson with an older man on a fishing boat, both grinning wildly at the camera. "The last good day," he whispered. I don't know why he talked to me that night. Maybe because I was there. Maybe because I wasn't anyone who mattered in his world. Or maybe because some pain is too heavy to carry alone. But talk he did. About growing up poor in Detroit. About his father working double shifts at the auto plant until his hands were permanently stained with grease. About the scholarship that was his ticket out, but that his father never lived to see him accept. "Everyone thinks I'm self-made," he said, laughing bitterly. "Nobody's self-made. We just don't acknowledge the shoulders we stand on." In that moment, the distance between our worlds shrank. Different circumstances, same human struggles. I saw myself in him, and maybe, just maybe, he saw himself in me. After that night, something shifted between us, not all at once, but gradually, like ice melting at the edges. He'd acknowledge me when he passed through rooms I was cleaning. Sometimes he'd ask how my day was going, and actually wait for an answer. Small things, but in his world, revolutionary. One morning, I found him in the kitchen attempting to make coffee, a man who had staff to handle his every need, fumbling with filters and beans. I showed him how, laughing at his genuine confusion over something so ordinary. He asked about my son, Marcus, who was struggling with college applications. The next day, 3 books on college essays appeared on the kitchen counter with a note, "For Marcus." Our conversations deepened. Sometimes after I finished cleaning his study, he'd ask me to stay for a cup of tea. He'd tell me about the crushing loneliness of his position, how everyone wanted something from him, how he could never be sure if people liked him or his money, how exhausting it was maintaining the perfect image his board of directors expected. I told him about raising a black son alone in a world that didn't make space for him, about dreaming of opening my own small business but never having enough capital, about the poetry I wrote late at night that no one ever read. You know more about me than anyone else alive, he told me one evening, looking almost surprised at his own words. The strange thing was, people began to notice the change in him. His assistant mentioned that he seemed calmer in meetings. A business magazine ran a piece titled, "The New Jackson Pierce, From Cutthroat to Compassionate," when he revised his company's parental leave policy. He started declining party invitations that once would have been mandatory networking opportunities. "They're all so empty," he explained when I asked. "I'd rather have one real conversation than 100 fake ones." I realized I was witnessing something remarkable. A man who had everything the world values discovering what actually matters. And somehow, inexplicably, I was part of that journey. A black woman from the South Side was teaching one of the richest men in America how to be human again. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. One Tuesday morning, Jackson called me into his office. His face was tense, screens behind him displaying graphs and projections. He explained that his board was pushing for an acquisition of a smaller tech company, a move that would boost their market position but require laying off hundreds of workers, many from communities like mine. "On paper, it's the right business decision," he said, running his hands through his hair. "The shareholders would be thrilled. My net worth would probably jump another few million." I watched him pace, remembering our conversations about his father, about dignity in work, about purpose beyond profit. "What would your dad think?" I asked quietly. He stopped cold. For a long moment, he just stared out the window at the ocean. "He'd be ashamed of me," he finally whispered. 3 days later, Jackson walked into a board meeting and rejected the acquisition. Instead, he proposed a partnership that would preserve jobs and invest in training programs for underserved communities. The business press called it Pierce's puzzling pivot. His stock took a temporary hit. Several board members threatened to resign. "They think I've lost my mind," he told me, laughing with genuine relief. "Maybe I have, or maybe I've finally found it." What followed was like watching someone shed an old skin. He restructured his charitable foundation to focus on economic mobility in working-class neighborhoods. He started mentoring young entrepreneurs from backgrounds like his own. He sold the mansion, too much empty space, and moved to a modest home closer to his company. Our relationship evolved too. I quit cleaning his house but became the first employee of his foundation's new community initiative. My son Marcus received a full scholarship to college through a program Jackson established. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, we'd sit on his new, much smaller porch and talk about everything and nothing. Two people from different worlds who somehow found common ground. "You know what's ironic," he said one night. "I spent years trying to escape where I came from, only to realize it was the best part of me all along." I smiled, thinking of my own journey. Sometimes we need someone else's eyes to see ourselves clearly. Today, 5 years after that stormy night in his study, both our lives look nothing like they once did. Jackson still runs his company, but with a new mission that balances profit with purpose. The foundation we built together has helped launch over 200 small businesses owned by people from underserved communities. My son Marcus graduated college and works in sustainable technology. And me? I published my first book of poetry last year, dedicated to my mother and, surprisingly, to Jackson. People still don't quite understand our friendship. The tabloids tried to spin romantic angles that made us both laugh. Business analysts questioned his sudden change of heart as if human growth was suspicious. But we know the truth. Two people from opposite ends of the economic spectrum found something rare in each other, recognition of our shared humanity beneath all the labels society placed on us. I've learned that wealth can be the thickest mask of all, hiding the person behind layers of expectations and assumptions. Jackson learned that sometimes the most valuable perspective comes from someone society taught you to overlook. We both discovered that authentic connection doesn't care about bank accounts or backgrounds. It cares about seeing each other's true selves. Look beyond the wealth, the status, the surface. The richest connections happen when we see the person inside. Who in your life needs to be truly seen today? That connection might just save both of you, because in the end, that's what saved us. Not his millions or my wisdom, but the simple revolutionary act of truly seeing each other when the rest of the world only saw what they expected to see.